not at all. Okay, could you please, one more time, confirm your team number?
517.
517. Okay, thank you so much, Team 517. Welcome to Washington, D.C., and congratulations on making the final round of the Fiscal Challenge. My name is Phil Smith, and I'm the National Field Director for the nonpartisan Concord Coalition. I'm pleased to be your Emcee and timekeeper for today's competition. I'm going to go over the rules one last and final time for you. I know you know them, but hopefully this will really cement it. You will have 15 minutes to present your plan. Those 15 minutes will include any time you wish to allocate to introductions. The judges will not ask questions during this first 15-minute time period. I will alert you when I start the timer. I will alert you when you have 5 minutes to go and 1 minute to go, and then of course when your time is up. I will be curt when the time is up and stop you mid-sentence. We will then transition to Q&A. You will again have 15 minutes for Q&A to field and address questions from our judges. If your team is answering a question when the time is called, I will let the person answering the question complete their thought. However, they may not switch to other thoughts, nor may other students contribute to that answer. Questions can include how you have incorporated recent events or releases that have occurred since your first round proposal. At no time during your presentation or Q&A should you reveal your individual names or school affiliation. You may only reveal your team number. Faculty advisors may be in the audience for both presentation and Q&A, but may not participate. Once your team has finished, you may join the audience to watch the other teams. You may now begin when you are ready. I will start the timer when you begin speaking.
All right, good morning and welcome to Team 517's presentation of the 2025 Fiscal Challenge. We'll begin our presentation with the current fiscal outlook before turning to our expenditure reforms, followed by revenue collection strategies and a final outlook on long-term resilience and debt reduction. Starting us off, the U.S. economy has seen a resilience bounce back following the COVID-19 pandemic. Nominal GDP expanded at 5.2% in 2024, reaching roughly $27 trillion, with the CBO forecasting an annual expansion of 3.7% for the next 30 years. This rate, however, is lower than that of previous decades, stemming from an expected slowing of the growth of the U.S. population and productivity. Moreover, the CBO projects that the current debt held by the public at 97% of GDP is expected to grow at 1.8% for the next 30 years, reaching roughly 167% of GDP during Q2 of 2055. This is primarily driven by a growing deficit, expected to grow up to 8.5% of GDP in 30 years, a reality often ignored by Congress. Specifically, the growth in U.S. debt is driven by rising healthcare and net interest payments. The latter are projected to double in magnitude, given a higher interest rate environment, taking net interest payments to 6.3% of GDP by 2055. Revenues, on the other hand, are projected to stagnate, and the current administration's budget proposal, inclusive of an additional $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, further threatens to reduce the revenue base. However, with the appropriate policy changes, the fiscal paradigm can shift towards a healthier, steady state. Specifically, our synthesized proposals are forecasted to reduce debt to GDP to roughly 92%, surpassing the 95% goal with sustainable and innovative reforms.
To commence, the current trajectory of Social Security is fiscally untenable. The CBO projects trust fund insolvency by 2034. To address this, we propose a voluntary opt-out system beginning in 2025 that enhances individual agency over retirement planning while ensuring long-term fiscal sustainability. In this, each beneficiary is given the option to opt out, wherein their payments to Social Security will be invested into a mandatory retirement savings account. The employer contributions to Social Security will remain. Applying recommendations by Cato, workers who opt out will receive a rebate equal to 75% of their previous contributions, including both their own and their employer's share as well. This will be deposited into a retirement account with annuitized payout structures that mirror existing Social Security benefits. These accounts will be governed by pertinent risk protections, including a government-managed low-risk investment option to preserve retirement security. This proposal introduces a fiscally responsible and a forward-looking reform, addressing key challenges that could arise during implementation. Based on the CBO projections, the opt-out mechanism is expected to incur an upfront cost of approximately $22 trillion over the next 30 years. However, this system is phased in over 15 years, spreading rebate disbursements over multiple budget cycles and proportionally decreasing deficit federal obligations as participation increases. Moreover, regressivity concerns are addressed by income-based proportional rebates, ensuring commensurate returns on opt-outs, structured payments, and progressive scaling. Considering current projections of federal budget expenditures on Social Security and assuming a 54.6 opt-out rate based on the American Enterprise Institute survey, our proposal will amount to $29.4 trillion in cumulative gross savings by 2055, corresponding with a 30-year cumulative net savings of $8 trillion and reducing the debt-to-GDP ratio by 3.44%. Furthermore, we will achieve solvency by 2045 and sizable surpluses by 2055 Q2.
Moving on, the United States is the only developed country in the OECD that is yet to implement a universal healthcare system, with current outlays expected to constitute 8.3% of GDP by 2055. To address this, we propose a universal catastrophic coverage healthcare system for all legal residents not currently under Medicare or Medicaid. A universal catastrophic system provides an out-of-pocket max to all under it, calculated at 14.5% of surplus income, or the difference between adjusted gross income and the federal poverty line, FPL, with full coverage being granted after an individual meets this limit. Moreover, this system would provide all those under it a health savings account, which would be in conjunction with the replacement of the employer-sponsored health insurance tax exclusion for contributions to employee health savings accounts. The government can use its position as the biggest healthcare provider to negotiate drug and provider payments, lowering costs to the government and consumers alike. This system is funded by a flat per capita tax for the eligible population, set at the average actuary value, with subsidies given to those within 100 to 300% of the FBL and no tax levied on those with less than 100% of the federal poverty line. The advantages of this system are reduced administrative costs to healthcare providers, lower consumer drug prices, and a social safety net for those not covered previously. Despite some unpopularity with a universal mandated system for all legal residents, this program would promote both the health of the individuals under the program and perpetuate market solutions through individual direct participation via health savings accounts. Based on Jody Liu's 2016 paper, healthcare reforms will aggregate $40 trillion in savings over the next 30 years, reducing the debt-to-GDP ratio by 16.96%.
Let's move on to executive cuts. According to the CBO, discretionary spending continues to grow at an alarming rate, with projections showing an additional $2.2 trillion in discretionary spending by 2035 alone. Significant proportions of these ever-growing outlays are made up of inefficient programs that could either be eliminated or streamlined. This reality highlights the potential for executive cuts to constitute a viable tool to achieve our fiscal stability goals. First, we propose to eliminate business and farming subsidies to allow for greater competition in agriculture and further crop diversification. Next, we support the dismantling of the Small Business Administration due to its poor track record of debtor choice, with existing loans transferred to the Treasury Department to ease with the transition. The Department of Energy would undergo partial privatization, focusing on nuclear power while removing energy subsidies, thereby encouraging cost-saving measures that better adapt to economic fluctuations. Lastly, FEMA's responsibilities would be devolved to state governments, ensuring localized disaster responses and reducing the federal burden.
Building on, abolishing the Department of Housing and Urban Development would remove regulations that restrict price elasticity and market responsiveness, thereby expanding housing supplies. Simultaneously, restructuring the Department of Transportation to allow expanding toll-based systems and greater private urban transit support would supplement fiscal prudence. Finally, privatizing the USPS would streamline mailing efficiency and increase consumer satisfaction. These reforms correct public sector allocative inefficiencies, enabling competitive markets to optimize resource use, drive productive efficiency, and reduce price distortions. Short-term federal job displacements may occur. However, labor market flexibility and sector reabsorption into higher margin productivity sectors will facilitate a smoother transition, ultimately enhancing aggregate output and fiscal consolidation. In terms of its contribution to our debt reduction goals, the cuts will save an aggregate $38 trillion and reduce debt to GDP by roughly 16% over the next 30 years?
We now begin with revenue generation policies, starting off with the land value tax. The United States faces an exigent requirement to modernize its tax structure. Structural inefficiencies embedded through the reliance on income and corporate taxation impose significant distortions on economic decision-making, as well as labor and capital formation. A more economically sound alternative lies in the adoption of a land value tax, LVT. Our proposal calls for the levying of a 6.5% annual LVT on the unimproved value of land. Our implementation model introduces the tax at 10% of its full rate in year 1, gradually increasing to 6.5% annually by year 10 to ensure a smooth economic transition. This implementation will allow for the viable replacement of restrictive zoning regulations while ensuring a fair, market-driven real estate environment. To ensure state governments maintain sufficient funding, our LVT model will follow a 70-30 revenue split between the federal government and state governments. Our LVT proposal fundamentally enhances economic equality, efficiency, and resilience, strengthening the conditions necessary for long-term debt reduction. The policy ensures that landowners contribute proportionally to public infrastructure and services, reducing wealth concentration from passive land holding. Simultaneously, LVT discourages speculative land holding, increasing land supply, and driving down housing costs and improving affordability. Critics of a land-based taxation model argue that LVT could foster market distortions due to fluctuations in land pricing. However, the gradual 10-year implementation timeline allows the market to adjust, preventing abrupt price shocks. Opponents of LVT implementation may be large-scale landowners. However, landowners pay based on true land value, not improvements, ultimately reducing overall taxation on improved land. Improved land. We forecast that LVT will generate $92.85 trillion and reduce the debt to GDP ratio by 39% over an aggregate 30-year period. The inelasticity of land and reduced volatility ensure that LVT remains relatively stable across economic cycles.
To complement that, we propose an adaptive externality tax. Our proposal for taxation enhances externality pricing efficiency by dynamically adjusting carbon, congestion, and pollution taxes based on 5-year adjustments, ensuring optimal revenue generation and environmental accountability while mitigating excess fiscal drag during downturns. A starting $50 carbon tax, as well as additional Pigouvian taxes on industrial waste and resource extraction, will drive economic efficiency and sustainability. To mitigate risks, including market volatility, regulatory overreach, and industry resistance, we will implement preset adjustment parameters and gradually phase in the policy, ensuring economic adaptability. Extrapolations based on the IMF, Brookings, and OECD projections estimate $5.3 trillion in cumulative revenue, debt to GDP ratio reduction by 2.2%, while our emissions will decline by 47% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels, reinforcing fiscal and environmental viability.
Now on to negative income tax. In terms of our taxation policy, the existing U.S. welfare system is characterized by inefficiencies, administrative redundancy, and disincentives to work, failing to optimize resource allocation for poverty alleviation. Our proposed negative income tax, NIT, builds upon the foundational principles of Freeman's market-oriented welfare model, replacing fragmented income support programs with direct tax-free transfers to individuals earning up to 200% of the FPL. This approach internalizes work incentives by phasing out benefits, overcoming concerns of a welfare trap through a gradual 50% phase-out rate. In line with Philip Robbins' 1985 publication, consolidating existing income security mechanisms into a singular framework enhances both fiscal sustainability and economic mobility. Challenges associated with interim shift in the welfare transition will be tackled through the gradual phase-in and bridge funding for vulnerable populations to ensure continuity of benefits during the modification. Excessive demand-side inflationary shocks are controlled by having NIT disbursements funded through the spending relocations and revenue stabilization measures. Based on findings detailed in literature from the CBO, Robbins, and Cato, we estimate cumulative net savings around $11 trillion over the 30-year interval and debt to GDP ratio reduction by approximately 3.8%.
For additional tax reforms, we propose a 2-bracketed marginal income tax, a 5% rate earnings between 200% of the FPL and the Social Security tax cap, and a 15% rate on income above that. Moreover, we propose changing the corporate tax to a flat 10% rate. This structure is progressive from the bottom up, avoiding discretionary cliffs and eliminating reliance on trickle-down redistribution. While this would hike the debt to GDP ratio by 7.85%, this reform complements our framework by raising disposable income where consumption impact is strongest, reinforcing demand-side growth. Paired with LVT and NIT, This restructuring shifts the burden off labor towards rent extraction and amplifies welfare delivery. With regard to legislative practicality, we acknowledge that some of our policies will be opposed by Republicans and others by Democrats. However, when presented as a comprehensive package, our proposals will constitute a compromise across party lines. Policies involving privatization, subsidy removal, and cost-cutting measures are likely to align with Republican legislative priorities. On the other hand, those emphasizing federal involvement in reducing out-of-pocket healthcare expenses, taxation, and welfare payments are likely to represent Democratic legislative goals. However, by introducing these ideologically divisive policies alongside more moderate initiatives, such as income tax reforms and NIT, we provide the best chance at overcoming polarization and legislative gridlock to change the fiscal landscape.
In conclusion, our fiscal framework represents a paradigm shift in debt stabilization, balancing counter-cyclical revenue mechanisms with structural expenditure recalibrations to achieve a 92.43% debt to GDP ratio by Q2 of 2055. By recalibrating both revenue and expenditures within a macroeconomic stability framework, we ensure that fiscal consolidation, evidenced by a $2.7 billion budget surplus in Q2 2055, complements economic dynamism, enhancing debt sustainability without dampening aggregate demand or long-run productive capacity. This mitigates revenue volatility, inflationary pressures, and debt service costs through diversified, self-correcting mechanisms that individually contribute to a broader framework of debt reduction rather than reactive austerity. Thank you.
Thank you, Team 517. It is now time to transition to our Q&A, and we turn it over to our esteemed panel of judges.
I'd like to dig into the property tax issue. As far as I know, there's no current federal property tax. Mostly it's local, and there's some state depending on the states. Could you walk us through how you would implement that and how you would address questions of federalism and the ability of the federal government to replace all of this state and local revenue with this new approach?
Yeah, so for this proposal, it would be a federal top-down. It would be we'd be taking it as a bottom-up approach. So each state would be performing their land value tax calculations, and from there they would be keeping the 30% portion of their share, and 70% would be going towards the federal government. To address claims of federalism, we would just point out that while yes, this does involve more federal overreach into how states are exactly able to price their goods, we would not be restricting the states from laying any additional property taxes that they may want. And we'd also like to point out that our 30% proposal for their revenue generation would give them more revenue compared to their traditional property tax. And I would say overall, even though our LVT proposal does involve more federal involvement, combined with our other policies, which devolve many of the federal government's current responsibilities to the states, it provides a balanced outlook.
Okay, so it is a revenue sharing program is what it would be, administered locally, and then funds would be transferred to the federal government. Okay.
Let's stay on that just for a second. So I think you're imagining this as both a revenue raiser and it's solving the problem. It's helping to solve the housing shortage, I think, right?
Yep.
Because you're saying that one of the primary causes of the housing shortage is developers holding land just speculatively and not improving it. So first, can you talk about how you decided that was the primary? That's one of the primary causes of the housing shortage. And then second, did you incorporate how your tax then, if it solved this problem, would lead to less undeveloped land to be taxed?
I guess I can take this one. We have some data that says empirical, basically data from cities like Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, which implemented split rate property taxes, an early form of LVT. It showed that vacant land was quickly repurposed into productive uses. Furthermore, we do have evidence that by removing taxes on the implements, LVT makes it cheaper to build land, making it far more rational to construct or at least to hold the land vacant, hence the reason we came up with.
And supplementing that as well, by instituting an LVT, we also recognize the potential of encouraging I guess, hoarders of unimproved land to sort of make the land more, productively efficient as a way. I mean, as a way to not only contribute to GDP, but also make sure that whatever land is sort of being used is sort of can be repurposed to, I guess, have more employment opportunities as a whole. So beyond just sort of incentivizing, I guess, owners of land to make, I guess, reduce tax burden by making it more productive, it also ensures that it has like a twofold contribution to the economy, be it both from the employment and revenue generation side as well.
But does the revenue from this tax decline as more land is developed?
No, because the source of the tax is the value of land, whether or not it's been developed, and so in this way we address the lack of incentives to sometimes perhaps develop the land, and then there's a twofold effect where overall the total taxable base is expanded because with current property taxes you can only tax the value of improved land. With this land value tax, you expand it by targeting that unimproved land that hasn't been taxed at the moment, while reducing the overall burden on the land that has already been improved. So it's we expand the overall tax base, and then there's that sort of incentive to make something with the land, perhaps build housing or just productive units. I don't know if that answers the question.
So the idea is that if there's a quarter-acre lot with a house on it, the value of the structure is not taxed, but the value of the land is.
Correct. Yeah. That'll be it.
And just adding on to this, research has actually shown that this method is much more stable because land values are way less volatile than housing or stock markets because they're tied to the location and not speculative development. And during downturns, LVT automatically adjusts, and especially if we look to World War II, land prices fell minimally during that period, while revenues from income and corporate taxes crashed. So this only proves the stability of this policy, specifically the land value taxes not only encourage more productive use of land, as is seen in case studies from cities like Pittsburgh, but also that it showed a stable flow of revenue even during economic downturns.
If you guys could go to the, I think it's probably back one slide from this. Yes, here we go. So this is your, I'm looking at figure 9, your debt to GDP ratio over time. For the, approximately the first 10 years of this budget window, debt is higher than CBO forecast, and then it pitches down sharply and then sharply again. Could you explain what is going on with your policy implementation timeline that's causing debt to rise in the short term and then fall rather dramatically in the second and third decade?
I guess I can take the question. So specifically, like most of our policies, particularly our revenue generation, both our revenue generation expenditure policy, I believe the increased costs come primarily due to adjustments. Like firstly, let's say when we institute a universal catastrophic coverage, there are increased costs by expanding coverage. But overall, these reduce when the returns from the flat per capita tax start picking up. And similarly with LVT as well, currently that the United States does not follow, and LVT does not follow a land value tax model. Shifting to that from a property taxation system would require initial costs and adjustments on a state-wise level, but over the long term they increase. And this is precisely why during the short term, like if you extrapolate this to other policies as well, we experience short-term increase in costs, but long-term these are taken care of, and we start generating surpluses as well due to our policies.
I would like to add on to that point that it's mainly due to also the Social Security rebates that we're providing to those who opt out of the system. So the first 10 years, we can see that the rebates are being implemented.
And with the rebates, we mean that at the beginning of the new Social Security regime, we spoke about implementing this rebate system where if you want to opt out to the individual saving account system, you would receive back 75% of the total contributions that you made over your working period. So this is where we see the spike. However, after that, when we transition to the new system that we pitched, we would see that the outlays get reduced as the total amount of people in the Social Security system go down, as people start to prefer the opt-out option, which according to our research should be around 54.6%, which one survey suggested. And so from this lower overall base of Social Security recipients, we see the majority of the savings come in after, I believe, 10 years.
One of my questions is on this exact policy on the Social Security. So it sounds, if I'm understanding this correctly, some people who under current law would have paid payroll taxes into the Social Security Trust Fund are instead putting that money into separate accounts. But I think I also saw that you're keeping benefits unchanged. What's happening to the Social Security Trust Fund during this period?
So essentially what our proposal is doing is the individual portion of the payroll taxes, so what the individual pays on their income, that will be, when they opt out, that will be taken away. However, the employer contributions for that employee will still go towards it. So in a hypothetical scenario where you have 2 people and 2 employers with 4 sources of revenue there, if one of them chooses to opt out, we would lose one of the sources of the individual payroll taxes, but the employer side for both employees as well as the employee who chose to remain in would keep that sources. So we essentially are reducing our revenue somewhat, but per person, it's more revenue.
Wait, I lost that last part. How is it per person more revenue?
Because in our proposal, only the individual payroll taxes that the person pays will be taken away. So we will still have both employer contribution to the payroll taxes and those who remain in individual payroll contributions.
So I want to talk a little bit about the negative income tax and what that looks like in your proposal, because I know everything went pretty fast. So would non-workers be eligible for this as well as people who have earned income?
They would indeed be eligible for this program. It's more so kind of like a basic income.
I guess I can add on to that. Basically, if you're below 200% of the FPL, you're guaranteed an income, but like the more income like you earn, the closer you are to that 200%. The lower you are, of course, you get like more back, but like once you get close to that like basically low poverty line, you're not going to get as much back. So basically, we're doing an income based, how much basically money you'll get back from the government.
Okay. So like a guaranteed basic income.
Correct.
Can we just think about the going back and thinking about timing and decisions here? So, if you will, assume we go into a recession tomorrow. How would you change the timing of the implementation of any of your policies?
I'd say that most of our policies are designed in a way to account for extenuating circumstances such as recessions or other forms of economic downturns. And like, for example, if you consider the LVT, right? I mean, firstly, we're assuming that all of these policies, including the gradual phasing in, they all start within 2025 itself. So maybe over a short span of time, or maybe even 5 to 10 years down, revenues will start generating, and it's essentially a self-correcting or a stabilizing mechanism. Like, let's talk about land value tax to start with. Land value tax, as mentioned previously, land values are much more stable than income or corporate taxes and provide a stable source of revenue, especially during economic downturns. If we look at negative income tax, the incentives that they provide people to, actually earn more, helps in ensuring that they have more discretionary income during economic downturns. And for other policies as well, such as if you consider executive cuts, like we are talking about, cutting subsidies within the Department of Agriculture, that is designed to shift, assistance from the federal government to market-based solutions, and that in turn enhances the self-sufficiency and resilience of the agriculture sector, as is shown because these, farmers grow their crops and then they sell it to cooperatives, or they own grain banks, which then sell it to foreign markets. So kind of like strengthening this channel provides an ability for farmers to adapt even when there are recessionary cycles or abrupt changes in demand or supply. So I believe our policies in most cases would correct themselves automatically or will make sure that we have a continuation of stable revenue generation or would not require abrupt increases in the federal budget or government spending even during crisis.
And just quickly supplementing that, I would like to bring attention to a point we brought up in our executive cuts where we talked about restructuring the small business administrative loans. Now, there has been research that shows that these kind of loans only reach a small number of businesses during the economic downturns that you mentioned. So we believe that by transferring existing loans to the Treasury Department, the access of credit, which is something that's very indispensable during economic downturns, will be easier to avail, ensuring that short-term liquidity and disposable income for both consumers and businesses as well is maintained a high enough threshold to boost spending without causing too much inflationary spirals.
Can I follow up a little bit? This is like a tangent to that, because I was curious about a lot of your executive cuts and the sort of the source of information on that. And one in particular was how eliminating HUD increased the supply of housing.
Eliminating what, sorry?
The Housing and Urban Development program.
I can take that. So our primary impetus for abolishing the Department of Housing and Urban Development was that from what we took a look at from historical data, the Department of Housing and Urban Development more often than not tore down housing than it put up, primarily due to its regulations on how exactly affordable housing must be built. A clear example of that being the projects. So what we wanted to do is in our LVT proposal, we mentioned a little bit about zoning. LVT actually provides a great impetus for developers to develop affordable housing because you want to increase the productivity to be able to pay for the tax on your land. So you're incentivized instead of single home housing to build affordable housing. So we felt that it would be number one, it would be redundant to have both organizations, and we also felt that the Department of Housing and Urban Development was not effective, even without our LVT.
Team 517, your time has expired. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.